Sofia thought she was just caring for another terminal patient in room 237, never expecting to feel such a strange connection to the elderly man's piercing blue eyes that seemed to recognize her, even when his mind was lost to medication. When she discovered his birth certificate among his medical files, her world shattered as she realized the man she'd been tenderly caring for was the father her mother had sworn was dead for 30 years. But the most devastating truth was yet to come. He had known who she was from the moment she walked into his room. Sofia had always been drawn to caring for others, working as a nurse in the oncology ward, where she specialized in end-of-life care, bringing comfort to patients and families. During their most difficult moments and emotionally demanding work, they gave her deep meaning by being present when people needed compassion most. Her family story was simple, if painful, with her mother Carmen raising her alone after Sofia. His father supposedly died in a construction accident when Sofia was 2. Though Carmen was always vague about details, claiming the memories were too painful to discuss. Since there were no photos of Sofia's father, no mementos, no stories. "He loved you very much," Carmen would say, "but sometimes life takes people away too soon. And we have to focus on the family we still have," which Sofia had accepted, though she'd always felt a hollow space where her father's memory should have been. Throwing herself into work, perhaps trying to fill that emptiness by caring for other families. When Mr. Eduardo Santos was admitted to room 237 with terminal liver cancer, Sofia was assigned as his primary nurse, caring for a 72-year-old man who had no emergency contacts and appeared to have no family, having lived alone for decades, while deliberately isolated from relatives. Eduardo was lucid most days, though pain medication made him drowsy. But what struck Sofia immediately were his distinctive pale blue eyes that seemed both familiar and haunting, watching her with such intensity when she introduced herself that she felt uncomfortable. "Sofia," he repeated slowly, as if testing how it sounded. "That's a beautiful name. That means wisdom, doesn't it?" Over the following weeks, Sofia found herself spending extra time in room 237 with Eduardo, who was polite but distant, never sharing details about his life, yet sometimes watching her with an expression between longing and profound sadness. As Eduardo's condition worsened, Sofia noticed strange inconsistencies in his behavior, as he would sometimes call her Mia, meaning my daughter, before quickly correcting himself. And when she mentioned her birthday, his eyes filled with tears he quickly brushed away, most puzzling because he seemed to know things about her she'd never shared. "You have your mother's stubborn streak," he said when Sofia insisted on adjusting his pillows, "but your compassion comes from somewhere else," which confused Sofia, who asked how he knew anything about her mother, causing Eduardo's face to go pale as he stammered, "I just meant you seem like someone who comes from good people." Sofia began to feel an inexplicable connection to this lonely old man, finding herself staying after shifts to talk with him, bringing books and sharing stories about her childhood while Eduardo listened with attention that felt almost desperate, as if memorizing every detail. One evening, while organizing Eduardo's medical files, Sofia discovered a manila envelope behind his chart containing personal documents, including his birth certificate, old identification cards, and faded photographs, her hands shaking as she read the birth certificate, showing Eduardo Santos, born September 15, 1952, with parents Miguel Santos and Rosa Santos, but the address listed as his childhood home made Sofia's blood run cold, since it was the same street and house number her mother had always claimed was where Sofia's father had lived before his accident. Sofia's mind raced, comparing dates, realizing Eduardo would have been 22 when Sofia was born, exactly the age her mother said Sofia's father was when he died. The timeline matching perfectly, though it seemed impossible since her father was dead, and her mother had told her so her entire life unless her mother had lied. Sofia confronted Eduardo the next morning with trembling hands holding his birth certificate, demanding to know who he really was and why this address matched where her mother said her father lived. His face crumpled with emotion he could no longer hide as he stared silently at the daughter he'd been secretly caring for. "Because it is the house where your father used to live," he whispered finally. "I'm Eduardo Santos. But 30 years ago people called me Eddie, and your mother called me Eddie." Causing the room to spin around, Sofia, who protested that it was impossible since her father died in a construction accident when she was 2. "I never died, Sofia," Eduardo said with his voice breaking. "I abandoned you, walking away because I was young, scared." and selfish while Carmen told everyone I was dead, because it was easier than explaining that your father was a coward who chose to disappear rather than take responsibility for his family. Sofia felt like she couldn't breathe, realizing the man she'd been caring for, bringing comfort to, and sharing her life with was the father who had abandoned her 30 years ago. But the revelation that shattered her completely was still coming as she whispered, "You knew who I was from the moment I walked into this room." Eduardo nodded with tears streaming down his face, confessing, "I recognized you immediately since you look exactly like your mother did when she was your age, but you have my eyes. And I've been watching you from a distance your whole life. Sofia, knowing you became a nurse and worked here, requesting this hospital specifically because I wanted to see you one more time before I died. You've been watching me?" Sofia's voice was barely audible as Eduardo continued, "I never had the right to be part of your life. But I couldn't stay away completely attending your high school graduation from the back of the auditorium. Standing outside the hospital when you received your nursing degree, watching you grow into the incredible woman you are, while feeling proud every single day, even though I had no right to feel that pride." Sofia stared at this stranger who was her father, this dying man who had been living in the shadows of her life, asking why he never tried to contact her and why he let her believe he was dead, receiving the most devastating truth of all when Eduardo answered, "Because I didn't deserve you, Sofia. Since when you were born I was addicted to alcohol and drugs, violent when I drank, dangerous. And your mother didn't tell people I was dead to protect her reputation. She told them I was dead to protect you from me." He reached into his bedside drawer with shaking hands, pulling out a thick folder filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents, explaining, "These are all the moments I missed, but watched from afar, including your first day of school. Your graduation, awards you received, articles about your work here at the hospital. Collecting every piece of your life I could find, even though I gave up the right to be part of it." Eduardo looked directly into Sofia's eyes, eyes that matched his own, revealing, "I've spent the last 20 years clean and sober, but the damage was done, so I chose to stay away because the greatest gift I could give you was a life free from the destruction I would have brought to it." Sofia sat in Eduardo's room for hours, processing 30 years of lies, abandonment, and hidden love, while examining the folder that contained proof of a father who had loved her from a distance, celebrated her achievements in secret, and chosen to remain absent rather than risk harming the daughter he cherished. "I became a nurse because I wanted to help people," Sofia said finally, never realizing I was trying to heal the wound of not having a father, while Eduardo replied, "And I requested you as my nurse, because I wanted to experience what it felt like to be cared for by my daughter. Even if you didn't know who I was, these past weeks, being able to talk with you and see your kindness and compassion being the greatest gift of my entire life." Eduardo died peacefully 2 weeks later, with Sofia holding his hand. And in his final moments, she whispered, "I forgive you, Dad," marking the first time she'd ever called him that, and the first time he'd heard it. Among Eduardo's belongings, Sofia found a letter addressed to her, explaining that he'd left her everything, not money, which he'd never had much of, but something more valuable, a complete record of her life seen through a father's eyes, and the knowledge that she had been loved and watched over every single day, even by someone who'd been too broken to love her properly. Sofia kept the folder of photographs and clippings, sometimes looking through them to see her life reflected in her father's eyes, a life he'd witnessed but never interfered with, celebrated but never claimed credit for, realizing that sometimes the deepest love requires the greatest sacrifice, the sacrifice of presence itself. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who choose to love us from the shadows, protecting us from their own broken pieces. And Sofia's story reminds us that love takes many forms. Sometimes it's presence, and sometimes it's the painful choice of absence, with her father's greatest act of love being not staying in her life, but staying out of it until she was strong enough to understand why. If this story touched your heart and made you think about the different ways people show love, subscribe for more stories that explore the complex depths of human connection, and share this with someone who believes love sometimes means letting go.